Space and its geometry. Hello, my name is Peter. I am the creator of the developmentalist current of thought. From the worldview of developmentalism, the universe at its beginning was a complex unit composed of parts, unlike materialism that solves the equation of the universe through matter. For developmentalism, matter is one of the factors, another would be space. In relativity, space is interwoven with time. As seen in the video about multiple time, this relativistic interpretation of time is not shared. In developmentalism, space is one body and matter another, which together form a single body, necessary, fundamental, and exact for the geometrization of objects. It is verifiable by modifying the values of the bodies. Indeed, if the values of the matter in the objects are modified, they lose their geometry and configuration. The same thing happens if we change the spatial values, since if we take away space from the objects, think of particles, the configuration of the objects changes. Therefore, it is correct to affirm that space and matter are two bodies that form one and that none of their bodies can be modified, because if one or the other changes, so will the configuration of the objects. This question led me to certain hypotheses that space could not be neutral. I understood that space had to be a body that provides energy value. After struggling with quantum interpretations and fundamental forces, all the values that would lead me to an energy came from matter, so I did not find the necessary mathematical value to prove that space provides an energy value to maintain the geometrization of objects. However, because of the differences that he had found between space and matter, and because there is a necessary and fundamental relationship to generate all the objects in the universe, I did not rule out the hypothesis that space is not a neutral object. The objects that make up the universe are made up of layers of matter and space. It is also necessary to take into account that every form of existence needs space. We are used to thinking about the space in which we operate every day. But what is space like in our intelligence? Not between neuron and neuron, but when we dream, I ask, is this space three-dimensional or two-dimensional? When we think or remember, our space must adapt to our intelligence. Therefore, it would have nothing to do with the space we call empty. If our consciousness is immaterial, in what type of space does it exist? I ask because we know space in relation to matter, but it does not have to be the same space for a non-material existence, like the soul. I was forced in my work to address the issue of space, and I have come across something that can be more difficult to understand than time and matter, furthermore, about which we know the least, since it goes unnoticed because it is simply what we call emptiness. Scientists have collaborated with this conception by synthesizing it as a result of the initial expansion of the universe, as if creating space were only a consequence of compressed energy. Which brings me to a question: how much force of matter energy is needed to create 1 square centimeter of space? Space continues to expand, with an enormous force that causes galaxies to separate. However, this powerful force that causes the universe to continue developing and not expanding, according to the developmentalist conception, does not break the geometrization of objects. It does not change the spatial values in the particles. Well, if so, the configuration of the entire universe would change, perhaps in an unimaginable way. Having immersed myself in space to try to learn about its origin and nature, opened a series of unknowns that have encouraged me to rethink space as something that is produced by matter. For the simple reason that all existence, and I am referring to non-material existence, if it exists, requires a space to exist, and it is not necessarily the space in which the universe exists, nor necessarily the space that governs our intelligence. The of thoughts, that of dreams, is like material space. My effort and my work on space not only led me to questions that I cannot answer, they also inspired me to create 2 technological objects. I am going to develop one of them in this video, the other from the concept of quantum superposition in a second video, which is much more complex than the one I am going to develop below. I want to clarify that the technological object that I am going to describe below has intellectual property and is available only to those who acquire it. I am a private investigator, and all my work, although humble I admit, has been solved with my effort, and I have been there for more than 30 years, and, I admit, they have been more bad than good. This object, its monetization, would help me to continue supporting my research. For those who do not know my work and the objective of my research, I tell you that I am pursuing a very difficult goal, generating the scientific basis for spirituality which, if achieved, will be freely available to all people. Development theory has allowed me to take a step, but I am far from the goal, which I may never reach. But the only way to find out is to simply try again and again. The title of the video is Space and its Geometry. The concept of geometrization arose when I was trying to find a mathematical value for space, which would reveal that it is an energy that intervenes in the geometrization of objects, as I already stated. In one of the experiments in which I was trying to geometrize some simple figures, it led me to generate a negative on the objects. I noticed that it had a workspace. Similar to what happens when making a latex mask, there is a space that is called negative. I thought that the negative offers us a workspace. But in what way? I found the way by making a spectrum over the work area. By generating a spectrum, I converted space into an object as if it were matter. The next step was to know if the available technologies allowed generating a spectrum in space and making the technological object possible. I concluded that there are those necessary to take the first steps and convert the space into a spectrum and then geometrize it, codify it, and generate a single body with the material. Before continuing, I am going to make a comment on one of the many uses that the technological object could offer. I was watching a video on YouTube, a Chinese company that is developing drone-type vehicles, taxis that would eventually be flying. I thought that if it happened and if drones reached cities crowded with vehicles on the streets, in principle, it would be a solution. But the same thing could happen with time and space. But that would generate a big problem, since congestion and traffic accidents on Earth are not the same as in space. We all know what it would entail, and no one would want to be in that situation. I thought that the technological object that occurred to me could solve the problem of drone taxis, although it is not easy and the technology must be adapted. What I am going to make is a small model, so that the concept of the technological object is understood. Then it can be taken to the desired dimensions. It starts from a box made of acrylic. The purpose is only to know what is happening inside the box. Since it is not necessary to use boxes to develop the technological object. Suppose the box is 3 square meters and is where the spatial spectrum will be created virtually. The box will be a mother box from which we can start as a reference to expand the technological object. The entire place is then scanned. When scanning the place, we find the 3 dimensions, top, bottom, and depth, from which we will obtain the measurements we will need. The next step is to take all the data from the scan space to a computer. A 3D program must be used where a scale model is made in relation to the scanned object. Afterwards, a spectrum is generated and the 3D object, which was made on the computer, is geometrized. What is done is a scale grid, so that, when the 3D model is geometrized, it virtually covers the entire spatial object, the 3 square meter box. What is done later is to encode the squares that we made on the computer using binary language. Said code obtained in the 3D model is the one that must be loaded to the object that we want to move through said space, for example, a drone. Then there are 2 issues. If you want to monitor the box from the computer, you have to join them to generate a single object or body, so that what happens in the box we can observe in the 3D model. I understand that it is possible through cameras or sensors, so that if an object enters and moves inside the box, we can observe it in our 3D object from a completely geometrized spectrum. In this way, we will not only have cardinal points in a space, but also a geometrized and coded object. For example, if a butterfly is placed in the box, we can monitor its movement, which will give us a movement pattern, a code. If this movement is recorded and then applied, let's say to a robot butterfly, what you can do is load the information, the pattern obtained, and make it repeat it. In another example, suppose we have a person whom we ask to enter the box and draw in the space some objects such as squares and circles or whatever he wants. If that person starts drawing in space, we will have, in principle, the patterns in the 3D model, then they can be brought to a screen. Since the box I made was a mother, we can shrink or enlarge it as much as we want or can. In relation to drone taxis, it is more complex and well applied. This technology would serve to control space by granting specific routes through codes. The codes in a certain area would represent a route. The procedure is the same. You have to do geometrization and coding of a specific area for the use of drones. In fact, by generating a spectrum and making space a matter object, in the same drone a highway could be displayed on the screen, in this case virtual, similar to those used by terrestrial cars. This issue would organize the movement of the drones in an almost millimetric way, providing greater security for those above and below as well. I understand that this technology has many applications and advantages, which could be used when there is no visualization, such as an airport with a lot of fog. Since the geometrization and coding of a space applied to a ship, it does not need to look outwards, because the ship only has to follow the path given to it. As for other applications, I imagine that many would already think about where to apply it. Without a doubt, the greatest and most difficult application is in relation to the defense or control, if you will, of the greater space of a country. I understand that said technological object that I am describing has a lower value in relation to the functioning object, given that the necessary investments must be made to achieve it. However, any new technology, if it is functional, needs time and investors, visionaries who see potential. I think about the millions of dollars that are being spent on quantum computers, based on a concept of quantum superposition that is not even certain to exist in nature. Although it is not plausible for many, in my work, the theory of development by information refutes the concept of quantum superposition with a simple equation. Also, it is available on my channel. The video is about quantum superposition. The technological model that I am presenting has its difficulties. However, it opens a door to a different interpretation of the use of space, which by converting it into a spectrum will allow space and matter to be converted into a single object. For those people who are connected to technology companies related to what I am developing, I offer you to share benefits consistent with your work if you manage to connect with interested parties. The benefit they will receive will only be after the product is sold and its proportion has been previously agreed upon. On the screen, they have an email address. I understand that space conceived as a spectrum in which one can work, to the extent that technologies advance if it reaches quantum levels, would help find patterns in the behavior of particles. To finish, I just want to make a reflection. It is, at least for me, inevitable to marvel at everything that nature offers us, which constantly inspires us in observations. However, we always focus on its content. We let our gaze, and with it our attention, run through the space, as if it could give us nothing. In my case, the same void has inspired me in principle to understand it as an essential and independent factor for the formation of the universe. It has led my mind through spatial labyrinths where our mind relates in a different way to space. It has inspired me and warned me that a nature of immaterial order does not share the same space as the material. Therefore, it has generated a series of questions in me that I may never be able to answer due to the difficulty involved in knowing them. It has inspired me to create technological objects that, like any technological object, can be applied for good or evil because we see humans as our own enemies, as a threat. Maybe one day, we humans won't be our biggest threat to ourselves, but it is not going to happen just because of desire. We will have to work and join forces to become a species that is friendly to its own conspecifics. The information theory of development is available in book format. Title of the work: Information Development Theory. Author Pedro Bermejo. Amazon Store.